Go from the top, man. All good.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So by day, I own and operate hospitality venues here in London. So I organise events for advertising, media, technology companies, all commercial entities in London. I'm planning on launching a new venue in New York as well next year. But I actually have a secret passion, well, not so secret now, but for not just venue space, but also outer space. So over the last couple of years, I set up the Astro Ben podcast, which is why I sometimes try and introduce myself as Astro Ben. And in that podcast, I speak to who's who in the industry. So astronauts, heads of space agencies, rock stars. So yeah, you should check it out. But it's been a great way for me to get to understand who's who in the industry, what's going on. And then one day I want to start my own space tech startup as well. So I've got a few ideas, but I'm sort of taking it slowly. And I only want to make that jump from venue space to outer space once I know what my idea is. But yes, it's great to chat to you today.
I think that's so brilliant. I mean, it's gives you some structure to your research, networking, and kind of lets you start taking little steps in that direction without the big plunge.
Exactly.
But I'm kind of curious though, in what got you interested in space to begin with?
Yeah, well, I think like, a lot of people, I wanted to be an astronaut when I was very small. That was sort of my first job. And then I thought, oh, I want to be an actor because I thought I could, if I can't actually go to space, I could perhaps be in a film that was in space. And then as I sort of grew up and started working in hospitality, I basically run my own events company for the best part of 10 years. And it really took COVID, which obviously shut down the hospitality industry, to make me sort of think about what I actually want to do. And I've always been obsessed with space. I've been going to space conferences just as a hobby, sort of elaborate hobby for the last 5 years. So I've been to the International Astronautical Congress since 2017 in Adelaide, Australia, which from London is quite a long way to go for your hobbies. But I've been to every IAC since. And when COVID happened, I thought, what I should do is to, try and build my relationships with people in the industry, because I had a few contacts through the IACs, but I didn't really know where the industry was going. So that's why the podcast was such a sort of good idea for me, really. But I suppose the passion's always been there, but now with the advent of space tourism and people, and space is actually a lot more accessible now. So now when I say to my friends, I'm going to go to space by the time I'm 40, they still laugh a little bit, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility because, there's a whole industry booming, as you know. So it's it's a passion that I always had. I kind of put to the back of my mind for a number of years when I was trying to, make money and make a name for myself in hospitality. But now I'm shamelessly embrace it. And yeah, my whole thing is venue space and outer space. So I'd like to think I can do both at the same time.
And that's really neat that you've been able to attend all the IACs since Australia. I actually attended only one IAC, and that was the one right before Australia, the one in Guadalajara. I went there specifically to see Elon unveil the interplanetary colonization system, or whatever it was called at that time before it became Starship.
Yeah, that was great. I think watching that one on YouTube was the motivator for me to go to Australia, because it was just like, there was a bit of imposter syndrome going there and not being a scientist or an engineer, but I felt very, I got to know people so well. And yeah, hearing Elon speak was sort of the highlight for 2017. But actually since then, it's not just about the billionaires, it's also, everyone else in the industry, and I do go to the plenary events, but actually it's about like the networking and the, people my age, societies like the Space General Advisory Council, young people who are, the future of the space industry. That's why I really enjoy kind of building networks, because if I do start a space tech company one day, these will be the people that I'll need to build it. I need to have a pretty extensive Rolodex of, good people who have specialities in all types of industry, because, the space economy is going to open up not just jobs for astronauts, but painters, artists, pizza makers, delivery drivers, everything in some form is going to be in space. So yeah, it's such an exciting time.
And it's brilliant that you're already in business. So many potential entrepreneurs, space entrepreneurs, they have like this vision, I'm going to go build this orbiting space hotel or whatever. And they're like, all I need is like $10 billion. But then everything between getting the money and building the hotel is like miracle occurs here. But yeah. I imagine with your background in business, you probably are like, I need a step-by-step plan. I was wondering how that helps you.
Yeah, good question. I suppose I'm quite a realist. So I've having run my own business, I've had some successes, I've had losses, I've made a huge amount of money. I've also been bankrupt. So I sort of understands, the entrepreneurial journey. And, I know a lot of space tech startups, some of them, doing incredibly well. Actually, one of my sponsor for the podcast is a company called Space Ventures, which is a crowdfunding platform for space tech startups, which you should definitely check out. Aaron, who runs that, is a really great guy, and I love what they're doing. But there's also a lot of people who, have maybe just been in academia their whole career, and they kind of have an idea for, oh, we're going to print diamonds in space, or come up with some crazy concepts, and all they will have for it, that's actually an idea which I've heard before, which I really like, by the way, but all they have for it is a sort of PDF deck with some cool visuals of basically looks like science fiction, and then a sort of snapshot of the market opportunity, which everyone says is, it's $1 trillion industry, it's the next gold rush. And there's just not a lot in between. There needs to be a business model, it needs to be profitable, and not everyone is going to be a rocket company. I think we already know who the main players are for setting up that infrastructure to low Earth orbit, and it'd be very unlikely that anyone else will be able to catch up at this point, I think. So it's kind of, they're doing that, they're bringing down the cost of access to space, and then it will open up anyone that has an idea. You want to do anything in space, you can do it. But I love the idea of kind of point-to-point travel on Earth and things like that. So I think there's going to be a huge amount of benefits. But from a sort of entrepreneurial sense, I'm keeping my cards close to my chest on a couple of ideas that I have, but I'm also open-minded, because I think there's going to be, in the next 10 years, once we start having a permanent presence on the moon, and there's a space hotel, and and we're going to start mining asteroids, and all these crazy things happen, that suddenly every entrepreneur is going to be looking upwards and thinking, how do I get a piece of this? So I hope that I'm a step ahead of the game, because I at least get to know who's who in the industry, and where the industry is going. So that's kind of my hope.
I really do feel like that the 2020s are going to be to space what the 1990s were to the internet. And it sounds like you've come to pretty much the same conclusion.
Yeah, I do have concerns that it's going to be very similar, in that there's going to be a few big players that become extremely wealthy. Because with the internet, I mean, there was a lot of people that made money, but look at who's still around now. And with space, it's potentially, it's going to transcend every single industry. So I don't know how it's all going to work out, but yeah, it's certainly going to be it's going to be an exciting time. But I don't know. I don't know how. I don't know how where the similarities are going to end between the dot-com bubble, because obviously there was it was a bubble and it burst. Whereas if human space exploration is going to become a constant thing, then there's going to need to be other things. We've got to have the PR back. The benefits of space travel have got to be communicated back on Earth, because say we do get to the moon and we get to Mars, and suddenly there's World War III back on Earth. Heaven forbid, that would be awful, but the interest in space will go pretty quickly if something bad happens on Earth. So there's got to be an improvement on all levels on space and how we try and spread the light of consciousness out amongst the stars, but also there's got to be a kind of 50-50 balance of improving life on Earth, I think. And linking them together, because I do think space can save us in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, I think I make a valid point there. And also, I mean, the other point is, why would people go and leave Earth to be on Mars, to live on Mars? And I think you touched on it. It's like the same reason why people in Europe came to North America before it was developed. It's that things were really bad in Europe. In North America seem better than that. But do you see a way that we could actually have a big colonization or settlement on Mars that people would want to be a part of without things being bad here on Earth?
I think we're still way off having a settlement on Mars. I think, although we hope it's going to happen quickly, I think sadly it's going to take longer than we expect. I think we're going to see people on the moon, hopefully from 2025. I think estimated the first crewed landing is 2025 on the moon. Probably that will slip a year or two. I think Mars, we'll have boots on the ground on Mars by 2040. And that's just being realistic. And that's with Starship, so over the period of the 2030s, having starships landing on Mars and then moving forward to that. So I think that's just realistic. And then I hope that the plan is to have a permanent presence on Mars, as opposed to I know that's SpaceX's plan, but I think whoever, hopefully there's more than one entity going for Mars at the same time, and there can be some sort of cooperation. Obviously there's going to be a window for the shortest transfer to Mars, and people will probably be aiming for that at the same time. But yeah, I don't know. I think a permanent settlement is going to be quite small for a while. So maybe say from 2040, it will be 4 people. And if that doubled every year, my math isn't that good. So I can't tell you how many people that's going to be by 2050, but maybe that's 100 people by 2050. That would be great. That would be great. But that's still a way off that, most people are not going to be able to go. Like you're going to have to be useful to go on those early missions. There's not going to be any TV competitions or Instagram giveaways to send someone to Mars. These people are going to be the world's best geologists and theoretical physicists who are going to be able to do stuff that are truly unique, and going to be able to do stuff and work with the robotic infrastructure that we're going to have there to do the most science and make the most discoveries. Because it's a long way to go. But I do think everyone's going to be going to low Earth orbit. I think that's going to be crazy, and the very wealthy probably at the start are going to be the ones who are going to be able to go on vacations to the moon. But to be honest, the risks are high. So, I'm happy to not be a guinea pig and sort of see how it plays out. Wait for the price to come down a little bit, and then try and get there. But who knows? Things can change. But that's kind of I think that's a sort of fairly sensible and optimistic expectation of the timeline.
Yeah, I think as long as it happens this century, I'll be satisfied. But I really like the aggressive one that Elon talks about sometimes, about 1 million people on Mars by 2050. But it's hard to say. Well, when did you find out that NASA was planning to send astronauts back to the moon for the first time since 1972?
Yeah, I'm very excited by it. I'm actually going to my girlfriend. She's from Florida, and I'm going back to Florida for Thanksgiving. So I probably won't. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make the hopeful Artemis launch. But I think just getting that program off the ground is going to be a main. That's going to be a big relief for everyone. And then, I don't know how how the timelines are going to play out, but we're seeing the astronaut corps do training now. So people are, these future NASA astronauts are training what it's going to be like, to walk and do experiments on the moon. I think the whole Artemis focus, Apollo's sister and the first woman on the moon is very, very compelling and exciting, and that's going to engage with so many people. But I do think that needs to be communicated a bit more. I mean, I'm sort of doing my best to tell people about it, but here in the UK, I tell people about Artemis. People still don't really know what it is, because they'll hear about, oh, NASA's going back to the moon, but they won't remember Artemis. So I think there does need to be a kind of, duty for science communicators to, push what that is. But yeah, I'm very excited for the missions. I think they're going to be great. I see the argument about the overspending and obviously the the whole sort of government way of doing things. But I think people also forget that NASA are also behind companies like SpaceX, and it's sort of the handing on of the baton from like Apollo to Artemis, and then Artemis will work with other private companies and hands that baton on, and then that sort of public-private partnership, I think, is what is going to get us to the moon and Mars. But Artemis is NASA, and NASA is, it's the meatball logo. It's the, I feel like I can say this because my girlfriend's American. It's like, there's bad sides to America and there's great sides to America, and NASA is like the epitome of like what you can achieve, if everyone works towards a common goal. And I think only America would have got to the moon in 1969. It takes that kind of, very confident and, a bit, open to taking risks to say that moonshot, to set that moonshot goal. And I think, Artemis needs to do that, and it needs to not be afraid to fail. Which is why, I think when the launches get scrubbed, there is a bit of, there is a bit of nerves around and anxiety around the, getting the rocket off the ground for the first time. But I think once we're back, NASA will be going for the moon, and then people will start to get excited. And seeing a woman on the moon for the first time, probably we'll be able to watch it on our iPhones in HD, which is insane, compared to what people had in 1969. But I can't wait. I'm very excited.
I know it's going to be so different. We'll probably be able to choose which view you want to watch the landing from. Do you want to watch it from this angle or this angle or this angle?
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't even think about that. And there'll be like a 24-hour camera, like they have on the International Space Station. If you want, you can just like put it on your computer and have that on in the background, just a constant moonshot. But it's very cool. It's very cool.
Would it surprise you that most of the people I go to on the streets or at the coffee shops have no idea we're going back to the moon?
Yeah, I know. And yeah, and I think, we're sort of so overly stimulated with social media, and I think people are quite used to seeing shots from the International Space Station just on their phones these days. So it's going to take, I think the imagery we're going to get is going to be pretty useful in inspiring young people and getting people to pay attention. And I think people have forgotten. I mean, I wasn't alive in the late 60s, obviously. People don't know what it was like to kind of look up at the moon, and like in the Apollo 13 film where they, kind of cover with their thumb the moon, and it's that perspective on how far away it is, but actually it's not that far. It is, a few 100,000 miles. What is that? We can get there. We got there 50 years ago. And then there'll be lots of young people that will see that today, and then they will be the ones that will want to go and study science and engineering and try and be one of those first settlers on Mars, which is great. That's the whole purpose of space exploration. It's to inspire the next generation, inspire science, ultimately to, help us understand the universe better, and to, be nicer to each other back on Earth, hopefully.
I hope so. Now, you kind of gave a summary of how you think space development is going to be over the next few decades. But if we stretch that out to like 200 years from now, What do you think, how far do you think we have gotten in 200 years?
Yeah, well, as you listen to the podcast, thank you very much. Lawrence Krauss, he's very excited by what the world's going to look like in a couple of hundred years. I didn't find out exactly why, but I think it's because there's going to be so many breakthroughs. But there's still we're still Earth based. It's like this is the exciting time before, you know, I think it's hard as humans to really sort of comprehend the passage of time. I don't think we can see more than 200 years in the future. Like we all love watching science fiction, but ultimately it's always predicting what, you based on the science of the present and trying to, extrapolate that out and work out what the world's going to look like. I think in 200 years, well, I think we're nearly there already. We will be able to, I mean, we're already becoming more digitalized by the second. I think we'll be able to upload our consciousness to a computer and live forever, probably by the end of this century. And then once we've done that, we can, we can choose how to live in the digital world, whether that's for a set period or just live forever. There's a TV show called Uploads, which is kind of a comedy. But I don't know if you've seen it, but that's kind of the whole premise of the show is like when you die, you can upload your consciousness and then you can live in a sort of paradise world until you're sick of it, and then you can just delete yourself. It is quite funny. But I think in terms of space, that will mean that space exploration will change. We won't need to physically travel to Alpha Centauri. We'll just be able to, well, we will travel there, but it will be made up of ones and zeros, and then the possibilities are endless. They're not endless, but it's like if you're living as code, you can you can go, if it took 100 light years to get somewhere, you're not going to be conscious for that time. Obviously, it's just going to be instant. And then maybe that's sort of like Avatar, where you can put that code into robots that are already there. But who knows? You can tell I watch too much sci-fi. Yeah, I think it's going to be the advent of artificial general intelligence is going to change everything, hopefully for the better. But I think more sort of immediately in the solar system, we'll definitely have a permanent presence on the moon. That's within the next couple of decades, I think. Like the International Space Station there for a long duration. We'll have a presence on Mars. Maybe we would have hit Elon's target by then, 1 million people on Mars. That's probably realistic, I think, which is still in the grand scale of time for human development. That would still be impressive to be totally sustainable as a civilization by 2200. We'll probably be living on the moons of Jupiter, which I've just been looking at in my telescope behind me. It wasn't raining last night, so I did actually get to see Jupiter and its moons. I mean, it sounds really fanciful, but it's not that far away. The solar system's so small, and maybe have an outpost on Pluto. We probably would have had some pulsar breakthroughs that mean that interstellar travel could be possible within 200 years. But I hope by then we're sort of nicer as a species. So, maybe that's with the aid of AI that has sort of helped broker all these peace deals. But ultimately, where, there is no world poverty, there is no war, no one's working because there's an abundance of resources that we've mined from asteroids and infinite power. So where everyone's kind of doing what they want to do, but in a sort of peaceful way.
Sounds pretty awesome. I like to take that 200-year question and turn it around the opposite direction, sort of like you might turn around the telescope and look from the big end to the small end. So try to put yourself in the mindset of a high schooler 200 years in the future who's in a history class doing a project on the 2020s. What do you think is going to be worth remembering and writing about that happens in this decade in 200 years?
Well, that's a good question. I need you to do the questions for my podcast. Um, I think it started off with COVID, and that is not an inconsequential note of history. I hope it will be a lesson for all of us. And we're about to have COP27 in Egypt, the climate conference, and I would have hoped that what we've all experienced through COVID would be forcing world leaders and us as a society to be taking climate change more seriously. I don't think that's happened. So maybe things need to get worse before they get better. I think we're all sort of looking and hoping the situation between Russia and Ukraine goes away. But if it doesn't, that could be potentially very bad for the whole of humanity. So assuming we get through all that, I think we're only 2 years into the decade, and we've had COVID, we've got potential World War III, and that's not to be sort of alarmist. It's just the reality of what's happened. And I think the reason that COVID has happened and the reaction to COVID that happened was down to the internet. It was the first time where we sort of realized how interconnected we all are as a species. Everyone's flying around, and you can't stop people leaving their towns or their houses. Well, you can, but at a real detriment to society. And then the war with Ukraine has again sort of highlighted that there are still people in power that can command millions of people to do certain things. So, hopefully for the rest of the decade, we can start using the internet, but in a more positive way. So perhaps more discourse and conversations around how we deal with global issues like COVID, and working together more, being a bit more honest about how things affect us, and just the de-escalation of. I mean, look, I'd love it if this decade was like a huge decade for space, and a decade where nuclear arms were sort of de-escalated worldwide as well. But I don't know enough about it to know if that's even possible or sensible. But it just, as a planet, it doesn't make sense to have enough nuclear bombs to blow ourselves up hundreds of times. That makes no sense to me. So hopefully, in 200 years, someone will be looking back to the 2020s and saying, okay, that was a year where they worked out that the internet could be used for good, and they set humanity on a path to be more sustainable and to not kill themselves through rising temperatures, and also got rid of nuclear weapons, which is just a huge risk that no one needs.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And of course, we still have a couple other things, like Starship coming up, and the first landing on the moon, the launch of your company, your space company. All those things could be really big events in 200 years too.
Yeah, I know I know everyone always talks about Elon, and it's hard not to, especially at the moment with Twitter and everything else. But I do think he's going to be remembered as like the great engineer of our time, and the sort of Da Vinci of our time. And I think he will get humanity to Mars, which is major. So, in terms of like people in history, he's probably one of the most significant people that we'll ever know. Apart from the Queen, who's just died in the UK, which we're over now, but we were quite sad about. But it's those kind of people that don't come along often. They make such an impact on people's lives, for good or bad. But yeah, I can't wait to see. I mean, Starship is just so inspirational. How it looks, and it looks like something out of sci-fi. It sort of looks like if we are going to go for Mars, that is what a Mars rocket should look like. Yeah, 2020 is 2020 vision. It's going to be monumental for us, I think, when it comes to space.
Well, Ben, those are pretty much the questions I had. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Oh man, I could talk about space like forever, but yeah, I'm impressed with what you're doing. I don't know how you've managed to organize speaking to someone every day. I mean, I barely managed to find a guest every week on the podcast. So fair play for doing that. But yeah, no, I just, anyone listening or watching this, just to keep looking up at the stars, not down at your phones, and like get involved in space, even if it's scary at first to like try and get involved in a society or join an online meetup, but just speaking to people who are excited about space is don't be ashamed of it, just do it.
Well, thank you, Ben. I wish you much success. Look forward to listening to the future podcast, and look to see what exciting things you do.
Thanks, man. Great to chat.
Okay, bye-bye.